Back in June of 2022, I visited Six Flags Over Georgia, one of the higher-end Six Flags parks. I was very impressed by how the park was operated and the collection of rides in the park. The first coaster and second to last coaster we rode in the park was Twisted Cyclone, right at the front of the park. How does this RMC rank up against the other RMCs I've ridden, and is it better than Goliath in the same park? Here's my full review of Twisted Cyclone. Let's quickly start with some background on the coaster. Announced in 2017, Twisted Cyclone replaced the old Georgia Cyclone, a Coney Island Cyclone copy. It opened in 2018 by Rocky Mountain Construction, with the new layout standing at 100 feet tall and reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour. The actual ride experience was shortened as the third lap around was removed, with a track length of 2,400 feet. It consists of 3 different inversions and has a drop of around 75 degrees. Now let's dive into your Twisted Cyclone experience. Right at the entrance, you can already see Twisted Cyclone to the right. It greets drivers as they head towards the parking lot and is opposite you as you enter the park. Once you turn right down the midway, Twisted Cyclone stands right in front of you and is a pretty intimidating look. The coaster looks great with the light blue track and white supports, and the logo on the lift structure looks fantastic. You enter the queue and go through the unthemed queue before entering the station. Ride-ups are pretty slow, but for a Six Flags park, they aren't horrible. After boarding your train, the ride dispatches you into a wacky pre-lift section. This section is full of head choppers and introduces riders to the RMC-style elements, with a few unbaked turns and one small outer bank before climbing up the pretty slow lift hill. Up this lift climb, you can see a few signs that tell guests to turn around and warn about the gale force winds. Then, you enter the drop. This drop is very cool actually. It looks like a drop that heads straight into an inversion, but instead it turns during the descent. In the front, it's an okay drop, but in the back, this might be one of my favorite first drops on any coaster. The back row fakes riders out and then gives an extremely intense whip to the right while flying out of your seat. The ride ascends into what is called a reverse cobra roll, basically a 0G roll into a tight right-hand turn, before descending in another barrel roll. This element is probably one of the weakest on the ride. The inversions aren't very whippy, but they provide a little float. The turn isn't anything special. The back row and the down drop, though, is quite thrilling. The third inversion is definitely the best. After the drop down, the ride hauls for the rest of the ride. The most photogenic element is up next, the iconic wave turn right over the lift structure. This is one of my favorite wave turns, with a huge floater moment and a pretty extreme head chopper on the descent. This element is good in any row. Up next is one of the few elements on this RMC that's actually better in the front. This airtime hill starts out huge, but the descent is small, as it stays above the ground, so the front provides the most airtime. The back still provides some good floater. However, these 2 airtime hills in particular are very sustained. Following is a traditional RMC overbank. There isn't anything special here, but it provides for a whippy transition and also some well-sustained positives. Now we enter the most powerful element on the ride, a huge descending airtime hill. In any row, this hill will shoot you up out of your seat, especially in the back rows. You will come flying up in a sky rush type airtime moment. This is definitely my favorite moment on the coaster, and like the rest of the ride, there are some sweet head choppers. Now we enter the last inversion, which is also the best. RMC has mastered the 0G roll, and this is no exception. Similar to Steel Vengeance, the roll feels like a floater hill with the whole world spinning around you, making it a very fun experience, and especially disorienting in the structure. Twisted Cyclone then hauls into 2 back-to-back airtime hills, the first one very quick, and the second extremely powerful. This whole second half of the coaster is full of super powerful airtime moments that catch you off guard every time. The ride does its last turnaround with another overbank. This feels the same as the last, but with extra head choppers. Finally, Twisted Cyclone concludes with one of the most powerful airtime moments while twisting, so it whips riders around in a crazy manner. This transitions riders smoothly into the brake run. Twisted Cyclone is a relentless ride other than the first 2 inversions, but it's unfortunately very short. Now let's get into the categories, then we'll talk about my overall thoughts. Our first category is the first one you experience on the ride, the drop. Twisted Cyclone's drop is phenomenal. The front is decent with a great fake out and good floater, but the back row is where this drop shines. The back row has an insane lateral moment in addition to some great ejector and a fake out. This drop gets a 9 out of 10. It would score perfect if the front row was a little better. The second category is smoothness. This is easy 10 out of 10. There is nothing about Twisted Cyclone that is remotely close to being rough or uncomfortable. This is one of the smoothest coasters I've ridden, as is every other iBox RMC. The next category is pacing. I like using pacing instead of speed because sometimes slower rides are better than faster ones. Twisted Cyclone has phenomenal pacing. The only element really dropping the pacing for Twisted Cyclone is the reverse cobra roll. But the drop is fast paced and the ride hauls through every element following, which is great for the pacing category. But because this category also kind of acts as a duration category, I'll have to factor in the shorter ride time. However, this ride time doesn't hurt the experience that much. This ride shows sometimes smaller rides are better, 8 out of 10. The fourth category is transitions. The transitions on Twisted Cyclone are exactly how they need to be, fast and whippy. The best transition and the only one that can catch you off guard is the first drop, which really helps the score. There aren't many turns, but the transitions that are present are always smooth, especially near the end, with some good lateral whips, 9 out of 10. The fifth category is inversions. The inversions on Twisted Cyclone aren't the greatest. The third inversion is my favorite, which is nice and floaty with cool visuals, but the first two are underwhelming. They feel like filler elements, which is something unusual on RMCs in my opinion, 6 out of 10. The penultimate category is intensity. Twisted Cyclone is a very intense coaster. The valleys in the most section of the ride are very tight, especially in the second half, and the overbanks have some nice positives. However, Twisted Cyclone has some nice laterals as well, especially in the drop and also the ending airtime hill. This is a strong coaster, 7 out of 10. The final category is airtime. The airtime on Twisted Cyclone is top notch. This ride has some incredible airtime. The first drop provides some of the best and whippiest airtime in the back cars, the wave turn has a huge floater moment, and all the airtime hills in the second half are extremely powerful, the last even having a lateral whip. Twisted Cyclone gets a 9 out of 10. So, what are my overall thoughts on Twisted Cyclone? I loved this ride. However, this was the weakest RMC I've ridden, and it also just wasn't as good as Goliath in the same park. It really depends on your style of coaster. While the length doesn't hurt this ride too much, I prefer Goliath as it had better airtime, more sustained positives, and more sustained airtime. Also, Goliath is double the height and length of Twisted Cyclone. That doesn't mean Twisted Cyclone is bad. Twisted Cyclone had some of the most aggressive airtime I've experienced on the level of Sky Rush. The inversions aren't anything special, but the head choppers and whips are fantastic. It's just that other RMCs have more unique and better moments. However, Twisted Cyclone is still a fantastic coaster and a great addition to the Six Flags Over Georgia lineup. They definitely needed this ride. My favorite moments are the airtime hills in the second half, and you should definitely get out there and try this ride if you're not afraid of graying out every once in a while. I also enjoy the whole appearance of the ride. It really pops in this area of the park. Twisted Cyclone is a must-do. Thank you so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Comment what you think of Twisted Cyclone and have a great rest of your day.